parents spent my childhood saving for my sister's star power, while I worked 3 jobs to pay for med school. But when they demanded I sell my medical practice to pay off her failed luxury brand, I finally performed a family-ectomy. I, 30F, am a neurosurgeon. The title alone usually commands respect in the outside world. But within the 4 walls of my parents' home, it's just a footnote. My life has been defined by a quiet, exhausting pursuit of excellence that no one in my family seems to notice. While I was pulling 36-hour shifts during my residency, surviving on vending machine coffee and the sheer terror of making a mistake, my sister Maya, 30F, was being curated. That is the only word for it. From the time she was 12, my parents decided she had the look and the spark. They funneled every spare cent of my father's middle management salary and my mother's teaching income into pageant coaches, singing lessons, and later a branding team. I, the older daughter, was essentially a self-funded entity. I worked 3 jobs while maintaining a 4.0 in undergrad, tutoring, waitressing, and cleaning lab equipment, because my parents told me that doctors make plenty of money eventually, so you don't need our help now. They used the money they would have spent on my tuition to buy Maya a designer wardrobe for her first influencer retreat. I learned early on that my role was to be the steady, silent support beam while Maya was the neon sign. I never complained, thinking that once I reached the pinnacle of my field, they would finally see the disparity. I was wrong. Success didn't bring their pride. It only brought their expectations. To them, my surgical practice isn't a life's work. It's a communal insurance policy for Maya's inevitable failures. Maya's career is a house of cards, built on a foundation of parental debt. She calls herself a lifestyle architect, but the reality is that she's a professional consumer. For years, she's posted photos of private jets she didn't own and hotel rooms. My parents went into credit card debt to book. They didn't see it as a scam. They saw it as seed funding for her future stardom. When she decided to launch Lumina, her luxury sustainable clothing brand, my parents took out a second mortgage to pay for the initial inventory and a launch party in Soho that cost more than my entire first year of med school. Lumina was doomed from the start. It was overpriced polyester marketed as ethereal silk, and the only people buying it were her bot-inflated followers. But Maya doesn't do failure. She does pivots. Every time a collection flopped, she'd convince my parents that she just needed one more celebrity endorsement or one more high-end pop-up shop to break through. My father's retirement fund was liquidated 3 years ago to pay off a supplier in Italy. My mother's inheritance from my grandmother gone to pay for a PR firm that promised to put Maya on a 30 under 30 list that never materialized. Through all of this, I remained the safety net. I'd receive frantic calls at 2 a.m. from my mother, crying that they couldn't pay the property taxes because they'd invested the tax money into Maya's winter line. I'd wire the money, tell myself it was for my parents, and go back to the operating room, burying my resentment under the sterile precision of my work. The current crisis began with a phone call that didn't come from my mother, but from a collections agency. Apparently, Maya had listed me as a co-signer on a business loan for Lumina, a document I never signed. I spent a frantic morning with my lawyers, realizing that she had forged my signature on several minor credit applications over the years. When I confronted her, she didn't apologize. She laughed. "You're a surgeon, Elena," she said, her voice dripping with that manufactured influencer breathiness. "You make more in a week than I do in a year. What's a few $1,000s to you? It's all going to be fine once the spring line drops." I realized then that she didn't just feel entitled to my money. She felt entitled to my identity. She had been using my credit score to keep her sinking ship afloat while she posted photos from a business trip in Bali. I told her I would be filing a fraud report. That was the moment the family machinery turned against me. Within an hour, my father called, his voice shaking with a rage I hadn't heard since I wasted money on a high-end stethoscope instead of giving it to him for Maya's dance camp. "You would put your own sister in jail?" he roared. "After everything we sacrificed for you?" The sacrifice he was referring to was the fact that they allowed me to live at home for 2 months after college while I studied for the MCATs. That was the extent of their support. I spent the following weekend auditing the last 10 years of my financial relationship with my family. It was a sobering, humiliating exercise. I had loaned my parents a total of $145,000 over the last decade. Not a single cent had been repaid. Every time I asked, I was met with the same lecture. "We're a family, Elena. We don't keep score." But they were keeping score. They were counting every dollar I made as a reason to give Maya more. I looked at the photos of the Lumina launch party and realized the catering alone cost almost the exact amount I had wired my father to pay for his emergency dental work. They hadn't used the money for a root canal. They had used it for champagne towers and go-go dancers in silk jumpsuits. The level of deception was breathtaking. I felt like a fool, a highly educated, technically proficient fool who had been treated like a glorified ATM by the people who were supposed to love me. I called my office manager and told her to freeze all non-essential spending. I needed to see exactly how deep the rabbit hole went before the family dinner on Sunday. I knew a big ask was coming. The air felt heavy with the kind of forced cheerfulness my parents only used when they were about to ask for a massive favor Sunday dinner wasn't at their house. They insisted on a trendy, overpriced restaurant in Soho that Maya needed to be seen at. The atmosphere was suffocatingly performative. Maya spent the first 20 minutes taking photos of her appetizer while my parents watched her with the kind of adoration usually reserved for religious icons. Then the tone shifted. My father cleared his throat, the sound a harbinger of the coming storm. Elena, he started, using his serious patriarch voice. Lumina is at a crossroads. A very exciting, but very expensive crossroads. He explained that a major retailer, later found out to be a small boutique in a suburban mall, wanted a massive order, but the production costs were $400,000. They had already exhausted their credit. They had already sold the second mortgage. We've talked it over, my mother whispered, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. Her hand felt like a lead weight. The only way to save Maya's dream and our home, which is tied up in the business, now is for you to sell your minority stake in the surgical center. Or better yet, take out a business expansion loan against your practice. You have the cash flow. You're the safety net, Elena. This is why you became a doctor, isn't it? To help people? I looked at my mother, her eyes wide with a practiced, manipulative desperation, and then at Maya, who was casually checking her engagement on her latest post, completely unbothered by the fact that she was asking me to dismantle my professional life for her failing hobby. I felt a strange cold calm wash over me. It was the same feeling I get in the OR when a vessel ruptures, the moment where emotion is replaced by pure clinical action. No, I said. The word was small, but it felt like a mountain. The silence that followed was absolute. My father's face turned a shade of purple I usually only see in cardiovascular wards. No, he repeated as if I had spoken a foreign language. I will not sell my stake in the practice, and I will not take out a loan for a business that has lost money every quarter for 5 years. I continued, my voice steady. Lumina is a failure, Maya. It's not a crossroads. It's a dead end. And I am done paying for the scenery. Maya finally looked up from her phone, her expression shifting from bored to venomous. You're just jealous, she spat. You've always hated that I was the one with the talent, the one people actually like. You're just a cold, bitter woman who cuts people open because she can't connect with them. You owe us this. You owe me for being the star you never could be. The dinner ended in a spectacular public meltdown. My father stood up, nearly knocking over his chair, and told me that if I didn't fix this, I was no longer his daughter. My mother wept into her napkin, mourning the loss of my heart. Maya just stared at me with a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. I paid the bill, the irony was not lost on me, and walked out into the cool Soho night. As I drove back to my apartment, my phone began to vibrate with the first wave of what I call the flying monkey brigade. Aunts I haven't spoken to in years. Cousins who only call when they need a medical opinion for free. Everyone was suddenly an expert on family duty. The narrative was already being spun. Elena, the rich, heartless doctor, was letting her parents lose their home and her sister lose her. Dream out of sibling rivalry. It didn't matter that the debt was Maya's fault. It didn't matter that I had already given them 6 figures. In their world, my only value was my utility. If I wasn't serving the star, I was a villain. I realized that for my entire life, I hadn't been a daughter or a sister. I had been a resource. And the moment the resource developed a will of its own, it had to be destroyed. Monday morning, I didn't go to the hospital. I went to my lawyer's office. I handed him the documentation of the forged e-signatures and the unauthorized credit applications. File it, I said. He looked at me with concern. Elena, you realize this will likely lead to criminal charges for your sister? It's identity theft and bank fraud. I nodded. She's been using my life to fund her fantasy for years. If I don't stop it now, she'll eventually do something that actually costs me my medical license. I have to protect my patients and my career. The process of filing the report felt like a surgical debridement. Painful, messy, but necessary to save the healthy tissue. By noon, the police had been notified. By 2 p.m., my mother was screaming into my voicemail that the police had shown up at their house asking for Maya. She called me a traitor, a Judas, and words I didn't know she had in her vocabulary. I didn't didn't delete the voicemails. I saved them as evidence of the harassment I knew was coming. I felt a profound sense of grief, not for the family I was losing, but for the one I never actually had. I was mourning a ghost. The following day, I sent a formal legal notice to my parents. I was the co-owner of their house, something I had done to help them secure the second mortgage they had wasted on Lumina. I informed them that I was initiating a partition sale of the property. If they wanted to keep the house, they would have to buy out my half. Since I knew they had no money, the house would have to be sold. This was the nuclear option. I knew it would leave them in a precarious position, but I also knew that as long as they had that house, they would continue to use it as collateral for Maya's madness. I offered to pay for a modest 2-bedroom apartment for them for 1 year, provided they signed a legal agreement never to allow Maya to live there or use their names for any business ventures. My father's response was a text message that simply said, "We have no daughter." It was a relief, in a way. The safety net had finally snapped. And while the fall was terrifying, for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one being crushed. I was the one walking away from the wreckage. Maya, realizing that her traditional channels of manipulation were failing, took the battle to the one place she felt powerful: social media. She posted a 10-minute story to her 500K followers, crying without smudging her mascara. She didn't name me directly, but she talked about a close family member who was using their professional power to systematically destroy a female-led small business. She framed it as a feminist issue, the cold, corporate establishment, me versus the creative, authentic dreamer, her. The comments were a cesspool of vitriol directed at the faceless surgeon who was jealous of her sister's light. I watched the video with a mixture of amusement and pity. She was still performing even as her world crumbled. She didn't realize that the establishment she was attacking was the only reason she had a platform to begin with. I didn't respond. I didn't post a rebuttal. I simply forwarded the video to the district attorney's office as further evidence of her attempt to intimidate a witness in a fraud case. She was digging her own grave with a designer shovel, and I was done trying to catch the dirt. A week later, I received an unexpected visit from my father. He didn't come with rage this time. He came with a scripted, hollow remorse. He sat in my living room, looking 10 years older, and tried to appeal to the girl who used to love her little sister. He talked about how Maya was fragile and how the police investigation was destroying her mental health. He didn't mention the 400,000. He didn't mention the forged signatures. He just wanted me to make it go away. I looked at him and asked a single question. "Dad, do you know the name of the last surgical procedure I performed?" He blinked, confused. "What?" "No, Elena, what does that have to do with—" I cut him off. "It was a temporal lobectomy for a woman who had been having 30 seizures a day. I spent 9 hours under a microscope. You've never once asked about my work. You've never once asked how I am. You only ask for what I can give Maya." The look on his face wasn't one of realization. It was one of irritation that I was making it about myself. I stood up and showed him the door. The safety net was officially out of service. Without my funding and with the fraud investigation looming, Lumina officially declared bankruptcy. The luxury sustainable brand ended not with a bang, but with a liquidation sale in a rented warehouse. Maya tried to frame it as a conscious closing to her followers, but the reality was that the creditors were at the door and the Italian suppliers were actually a factory in a country with 0 labor laws that she had been lying about. The sustainability was as fake as her business model. My parents were forced to move into the small apartment I had offered, though they refused to speak to me when I dropped off the keys. They took Maya with them, violating the agreement I had proposed. I stopped the rental payments immediately. If they wanted to prioritize her over their own stability, they could do it on their own dime. I felt a twinge of guilt, but then I remembered the Soho dinner and the digital janitor comment. You cannot set yourself on fire. To keep people warm who are holding the matches the fraud case moved forward with the cold, inevitable pace of the legal system. Maya was eventually charged with 2 counts of felony identity theft. Because it was a first offense and I didn't push for maximum sentencing, she was offered a plea deal, 5 years of probation, 500 hours of community service, and full restitution, which she will never be able to pay. The day of the sentencing, my mother sent me a photo of Maya in a plain black suit, looking devastated. The caption was, "Are you happy now?" I wasn't happy. I was just done. I felt like I had finally finished a marathon I never signed up for. Maya's star power had finally dimmed under the harsh, fluorescent lights of a courtroom. She wasn't an icon. She was a convicted felon. And my parents were still trying to blame the light for being being too bright, rather than the person who broke the bulb. For the first time in my adult life, I had peace. My surgical practice thrived without the constant, draining emergencies from home. I started a scholarship fund at my old med school for students from families who didn't support their education, the Elena Vance Grant for Independent Excellence. It felt better to give to strangers who actually valued the struggle than to a family who saw it as a burden. I also started traveling, real travel, not the business retreats Maya took. I went to Japan, to Norway, to places where no one knew I was a safety net. Was just Elena. I realized that my boring life was actually quite spectacular. When I wasn't spending it, looking over my shoulder for the next financial hit, I had built a world out of logic, skill, and hard work. And it was a world that actually stood on its own. One last attempt was made to bridge the gap. My Aunt Carol, the peacemaker who had ignored me for a decade, invited me to tea. She spent an hour telling me how everyone misses you and how Maya has really changed. She then casually mentioned that Maya had a brilliant new idea for a skincare line and just needed a small, silent partner to get it off the ground. I didn't even get angry. I just laughed. I laughed so hard that the other patrons in the tea room stared. "Carol," I said, wiping tears from my eyes, "tell them to try a bank. Or better yet, tell them to try a job." I left her with the bill and walked out, the sound of my own laughter the most honest thing I'd heard in years. They weren't just entitled, they were delusional. They were still waiting for the star to rise, even as the sun had long since set. A month later, a letter arrived from my mother. It wasn't an apology. It was a list of all the things Maya needed for her community service: transportation, professional attire, a therapist. She ended it with, "You have so much. Elena, why is it so hard for you to share just a little of it? We are your family. We are the only people who will ever truly know you." I wrote a one-sentence reply on the back of the envelope and mailed it back. "You only know the woman who paid the bills. You never bothered to meet the woman who performed the surgeries." I never heard from her again. I realized that the family duty they talked about was a one-way street that ended at a cliff. I had just stopped driving before I went over the edge. I am now 40. My practice is one of the top-rated in the city. I am engaged to a man who is a pediatrician, someone who understands the weight of the white coat and who has never once asked me for a loan. We are planning a wedding that will have 0 influencers, 0 drone photographers, and 0 members of my immediate family. My safety net is now reserved for my future children, my patients, and myself. I still occasionally see Maya's name pop up on social media. She's trying to rebrand as a life coach for the misunderstood, but she has less than 10K followers now. The bot accounts have been purged, and the old money world Julian belonged to has long since forgotten her name. She is a small person in a small room, still waiting for a spotlight that will never find her. Sometimes, as I'm scrubbing in for a long case, I look at my hands in the water and think about the Soho dinner. I think about the digital janitor comment. I realize that being a janitor for the human brain is the greatest privilege of my life. I don't need a star to shine on me. I generate my own light. My parents' star was just a reflection of my own hard work, and once I stopped providing the surface, she vanished. I am not cold, and I am not bitter. I am free, and freedom, I've discovered, is much more sustainable than any luxury brand Maya could ever dream of. I am a surgeon, a wife-to-be, and a woman who finally performed the most important operation of her life: the removal of a toxic family from her heart. The recovery from a family-ectomy is slow. There are phantom pains, moments of guilt when I see a Happy Mother's Day card or hear a father-daughter song. But the vital signs are good. My stress levels are down, my sleep is better, and I no longer feel like I'm waiting for a building to collapse on me. I've built a chosen family of colleagues and friends who see me for who I am, not what I earn. We spend our Sundays having dinners where no one takes photos of their food and everyone asks about each other's day. It's a quiet, boring life, and I wouldn't trade it for all the followers in the world. I am the safety net that finally learned to hold itself up. So, Aida, my family thinks so. They tell anyone who will listen that I'm a cold-hearted narcissist who chose money over blood. But when I look at the scholarship students I'm funding, or the patients whose lives I've saved, or the man sleeping soundly next to me who loves me for my nerdy brain, I know the answer. I didn't choose money. I chose truth. I didn't choose spite. I chose survival. If that makes me the asshole in their manufactured story, I can live with that. I'm too busy living my own real, messy, unbranded life to care. The family-ectomy was a success, and the patient, me, is finally, for the first time, expected to make a full recovery.